Hey guys, it's Roderick. I'm here with a season recap and reaction to The Crown Season 5. So I hope you all guys had a really great Thanksgiving. I did. So I took this time because I wanted to sit down and watch The Crown, and I wanted to be in the best headspace to watch it. This season really means a lot to me because I met Princess Diana in 1996 when she came and visited Northwestern University. I was one of the many students, one of the few students who got to give her a tour of the campus. You can go to my Instagram and see a picture of that. Me and Princess Diana, of us meeting, and I may do a video one day about that whole experience because it's very treasured and very important experience to me. So let's get started. I'm gonna do a full recap, reaction, review. There are going to be spoilers in the mix and everything with that. So let's get started because that's one of the things I have to say is that if you have not noticed, the 5th season of any series, if it's worth its weight in metal, is really the best season. And I have to say that this season of The Crown is by far the best season so far. I mean, we just get, the symmetry of the entire season from start to finish, the character arcs, really the development, the writing, the locations. This is really the best season of the arc. If you think of season 5 of Sopranos, season 5 of Mad Men, season 5 of Breaking Bad, season 5 of Game of Thrones, all these really great series really hit their mark in the 5th season because they've done the work in the previous seasons to establish the characters, to create characters that we really care about, and to really, really up the ante, so that way you're just really emotionally moved by the journey of what these characters are doing. And I will refer to The Crown as characters because even though there is a certain autobiographical tinge to it, I'm not going to really believe that everything that happened in The Crown really happened in real life. I think some of it happened. I think we have a lot of news reports of some of the things that did happen, some things that did not happen, and the show admits they did take a fictional creative license with some things. So some of my points or criticisms are not necessarily to the people themselves, but to the characters as they are portrayed for the show. So let's get ready, because one of the things also I really love about The Crown, because as a student of history, I love how they really they weave a lot of historical aspects and components of this, and how you really sometimes have to pause the show, go to Wikipedia, do some Googling, just to see as the show goes on if this really happened. And I really love that about The Crown. So the first episode starts off, it's called actually the Queen Victoria Syndrome, okay? And what we do is we get a flashback of Claire Foy, who, as you recall, played Queen Elizabeth in the first season. I think she did the first 2 seasons, actually. And she's actually commissioning the Britannia, which is the royal yacht. And then we kind of see, we got a flashback to the present time, and the present day Queen Elizabeth, played by Imelda Stanton, who, for you Harry Potter fans, she was in Harry Potter, the 5, 6, and 7 seasons. Umbridge, Professor Umbridge, as you recall, from the Minister of Magic. So she does a fantastic job kind of really embodying that essence of Queen Elizabeth at this stage in her life. We're nearing kind of the 40th anniversary of her reign, which is about, the early 1990s at this point. And what happens is that we see Charles, played by Dominic West. If you ever watched The Wire, season 5, again, another great show, who's from The Wire, from The Affair, a lot of great shows. He's now playing Prince Charles. So Charles decides that one of the things that we see throughout this series is Charles's motivation to really take a larger role and a larger profile within the monarchy and not just be the heir in waiting, right? And one of the things I think that many people don't really realize kind of conceptually or emotionally is, in order for you to be the king, your parent has to die, right? So whatever this great ascension is also mixed with a large degree of sadness and, loss because, your parent had to die. As we saw in the first season, Queen Elizabeth did not want to be queen. She actually was not really in that high succession to be king, but for her uncle abdicating the role as king to be with his girlfriend Wallis Simpson, did her father then become king, and therefore placing Elizabeth the next in line to be queen. And you see that kind of tension, that your life is kind of like it's all in waiting, it's all kind of already foreplanned and forestalled, and you can't really have a whole lot of control over this. So anyway, so Charles decides, he wants to do a second honeymoon, second vacation with Princess Diana. So one of the things about this season is that this season was, I'm glad it wasn't so heavily focused on Charles and Diana, that we got to see a lot of the other characters. But this is really kind of, as we move to as the season ends, almost pretty much the circle or the completion of the arc of Charles and Diana's marriage and their relationship. So it starts off with this second honeymoon that they're going to take. Diana's very excited because at this point, she really does believe that her and Charles have a potential future, that they're going to mend things, and that she really wants to be a family with her and Charles. And, so she goes on a second honeymoon only to find out that he's invited all these friends, and it's not really a time for them to spend as family. Then come to find out he cuts the vacation short, and then she gets mad, and it's this constant bickering because, there's just an emotional disconnect between the two, right? And we see this in the kind of arguing and, just in the planning, what they wanted to do. Charles wanted to go see museums and artifacts and things like that. Diana's like, let's go shopping. I want to take the kids jet skiing. And we really see just how mismatched they really are as a couple. And, we'll get to kind of the how and the wins and the dirties of that in a second. But just how mismatched they are as a couple. And so then, we kind of move over from Charles and Diana, then the Queen, and thinking about the decommissioning, right? Because at this point, there's a whole thing about the Britannia being decommissioned. And one of the things happens in this season is that the Britannia kind of becomes this very much of an allegory to Queen Victoria herself, right? It's a relic of the past future that needs to be overhauled, that needs to be kind of overdone, and yet it's the willingness, the cost, right, to really overhaul the Britannia. And we see that allegory played out within the monarchy so much within itself of the monarchy. There are changes that need to be happening within the monarchy, but really, who's going to pay for those changes? What are the costs of those changes? And how many of these changes are really going to make it really worth it keeping, right? So you really do get a lot of, as the series goes on throughout the season, the talk of the Britannia and its future very much parallels the talk of the monarchy and its future, right? And the show does a really great job of using the Britannia as this allegory. So then we get to King Philip, who is played by Jonathan Pryce. If you ever watched Evita, he's done a lot of other great things, but I just always remember from Evita with Madonna. And he plays Prince Philip. And at this point, there's his godson, Norton. His daughter is stricken with has cancer. We saw Norton in the first episode or whatever. So the daughter dies. Queen Elizabeth says, why don't you go over and take some flowers, say hi to him. He goes over and starts kikiing with Norton's wife. And then they strike up this friendship. And at this point, Philip can't play polo anymore. So he's taking up horse carriage racing. I was like, the fuck? Why horse carriage racing? But he wants to be active. He wants to be out there. So horse carriage racing is something that Philip likes and enjoys. So him and the wife start striking up a conversation because she's clearly in grief. She's buried the child in their family estate, which is called Broadlands, I recall. And she wants to be able to see her all the time. And I think they just kind of strike up a very innocent friendship. But we know from watching the series, Philip really can't be trusted with some straying. So I was like, ooh, girl. I was like, where is this going to go, right? So we also get the whole talk. There's a reporter who approaches Diana about doing this tell-all book. And he approaches her friend who's a doctor. And then the doctor and him start playing squash. And then the doctor goes and talks to Diana about this concept, about the tell-all book. And Diana agrees to kind of answer questions, but not, particularly involved with this. And this is a big thing because one of the things that, as we see now in present day moments with kind of situations with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, is it's not that she's married into a family, it's that she's married into a system, right? And that system is to perpetuate the continuance and the protection of the monarchy, right? So going out and talking and airing your family's dirty business goes a direct conflict of the system because the system is about keeping things quiet, dealing with things in house. And Diana at this point is feeling very forlorn, and she's really angry, right? And whether or not her anger is legitimate or whether or not her anger is rooted in reason is up for discussion, right? Because there are people who say, well, you kind of knew what you're marrying into, and then people say you don't know what you're marrying into, and no one can really tell the future, and no one expects to get married, have children, just to be potentially mistreated and misunderstood, right? So, but again, I'll get to my thoughts on the whole situation in a second, but the whole thing with Diana, and so she decides to talk to this guy, and she's getting these clicks on the telephone, and she's thinking like, oh my God, someone's like bugging her phone, all this stuff, which kind of happens throughout the whole season. And we see that she tells this tell-all book, it comes out, and people are pissed, but the guy says that, he does a very slippery way. He goes, I never had any direct interviews with Princess Diana about the book, right? So that lets Diana off the hook to say, look, I didn't really meet with him, but she kind of answered questions with him, whatever. And you can tell that there's a whole security apparatus that's like following him, trashes his apartment, looking for things from the book or whatever like that. So, like whatever. So this is kind of Diana's way of letting her story go out there, because one of the things that's just very frustrating to her is the palace or the system will put out reports about her, right? Excuse me. And she has no way of rebutting those reports. And this is her way of kind of defending herself and defending her point of view of what's going on, right? So that's like our first 3 episodes, right? So then that's our first 2 episodes. Then we tend to take a shift, right? And we go to Mumu. And I was like, what's this Mumu? And then we get introduced to Muhammad Al-Fayed, which, as you know, is the owner of Harrods. His son, Dodi Fayed, was in the car with Princess Diana at the time of her demise. And we get the backstory of Muhammad Al-Fayed and how he is not just an Anglophile, right? He is a lover and cherisher of the British ways and the British customs. And there's this whole scene where they do this flashback where, Dickie had a Bahamian valet, excuse me, had a Bahamian valet, and they decided to bring him on, make him part of the family. So then we flash back to after Muhammad has bought the Ritz, he decides he don't want any black people in the Ritz because he's scared people ain't gonna show up to the Ritz because they're black. And Dodi tells him, well, I really liked him, and he's the valet to the king, okay? Excuse me, I have a really bad cold. So he goes, hires Sydney to be valet to the king. And so then what we do is find out, kind of he teaches Muhammad Al-Fayed all the minerals and the traditions of like British society, because that's what Muhammad Al-Fayed really wants, is that he wants to be part of British society, and he wants to really be able to rub elbows with kings and queens. And we see that's his motivation for buying Harrods. He pays a lot of money for his tickets to this big polo match. He's assured that he's going to be able to sit near the queen. Come to find out that he doesn't end up sitting next to the queen. He's up in the stands, and they're like, well, who's that guy? He's like, well, that's the guy who owns Harrod, who actually is a sponsor of this whole situation, which is his motivation then for him to buy Harrods. He ends up buying Harrods, ends up getting the seat next to the queen. The queen sees him and does not want to be next to him. And then sees queen, that she decides she was to hang out with her sister Margaret, okay, and Kiki with her, and sends Diana over to hang out with Muhammad Al-Fayed. And that kind of seems to be the nucleus of that thing. And even Princess Margaret and Queen Elizabeth saying, the one small acorn of kindness grows a really steady tree of a relationship. So by sending Diana over there, he's not offended, and she's the most illustrious, most famous person of the royal family, so therefore it's like, she's kind of better than the queen almost, right? So then the queen gets off, she doesn't fuck with Muhammad Al-Fayed. Diana feels like that she's doing some favor for the queen, so she can get in good graces, because this whole time Diana is kind of on the outs with the whole family, because they just view her as troublesome, and why can't she just get in formation, get in line, and do like the rest of us do? And the problem is that the women of the royal family who are born into that are very dispassionate about the plights of people who are different. There's a whole scene with Prince Andrew talking to his mother when the breakdown of his marriage with Sarah Ferguson happens about the family and the system just does not do well with people who have personality, who have flair, who are emotionally complex, and that, you know, all of these marriages are falling apart because the people who are born into the system know how to move and they know how to do the steps, and they marry people who are ultimately who just can't acclimate to that, right? People don't get married just to be married into a system, right? Because even at one point when Diana is talking to Charles about the problems with the marriage, it's like, you know, actually Prince Philip comes over to see Diana when he hears about the book, right? So Prince Philip comes over, sees Diana, and is like, look, I've always liked you. I've always gone up for bat for you for whatever, but you know the rules. You cannot be out here telling all our family business. And if you don't want to fuck around with your husband, don't fuck around with your husband. Find you somebody else. Just don't embarrass the dog fuck out of us. And that is pretty much the rule, right? You can fool Allah and do whatever what you want to do, just don't embarrass us, right? And she was just like that. And ultimately, I don't think that's enough for Diana, right? Because she's like, I can embarrass y'all motherfuckers quite easily. Embarrassing you is what I could do on a daily basis, but I want love, I want affection, I want somebody home with me. My kids are getting old, they're going off to school, and y'all done got me locked up in here and I can't have no friends, I can't do nothing, right? So, another thing that the show does is they really show Prince William when he's around the age of 13 or so, kind of going in, and that tension that is portrayed in William's character about the loyalty and allegiance and the care for his mother, and also ultimately his duty in caring for the throne and his relationship with his grandmother, right? So at one point, you know, when he goes off to Eton and the grandmother, you know, the castle is right over there, he's like, oh, you can wave over there, go see lunch. Elizabeth's like, oh, we should have lunch with William. And so they have lunch, and he's like a kid with his grandmother. Like, would you imagine most kids talking, whatever? And then he lets it slip that he's really worried about Diana, right? So now the queen recognizes that, you know, this situation is kind of troublesome because the son is really worried about the mother, and she doesn't feel it's right for kids to be worried about their parents, especially someone that young, right? So anyway, we get to, like, at this point, like, all the marriages are just breaking up, right? All the marriages are breaking up. And Queen Elizabeth really feels like it's a failure on her and Philip, and just a whole really horrible year. So let's get to the point, okay? Let's be real about this whole thing, because there's also a scene, an episode where Peter Townsend, if you recall from earlier seasons, who was the equerry to the Queen, and he was in love with Prince Margaret, and Queen Elizabeth forbid them from being married. And Prince Margaret was very unhappy. She really loved Peter Townsend, and she really kind of very much resented the Queen for doing this. And there's a confrontation between the actress, between Princess Margaret and Queen Elizabeth. And Queen Elizabeth makes this very stoic, very ice cold. She goes, I did not deny you as your sister. I denied you as the queen. And Margaret's like, it makes no difference, because you're allowing your daughter, who will be divorced, whose husband is still alive, to marry somebody else, and you denied me that happiness. And every day you stay with a man who is your son, who is your water, and you denied me son, and you denied me water. One of the best scenes of this entire season, because what Elizabeth doesn't recognize is that the sacrifice to be loyal costs everybody in that family something, right? And so let's be clear who the real problem was with these marriages. It is the Queen's mother, okay? Because if you recall from the first episode for the first season, it was the Queen's mother who told Elizabeth that this Peter Townsend relationship was not going to work and that she was embarrassing her. Remember when she was photographed in the Bahamas with Peter Townsend, and the mother got mad and stormed in Queen Elizabeth's office, telling her, this is trash, get your sister back here, and then cussed the sister all out and told them, I don't know what you think it is, but I didn't raise y'all to be some whores type of shit? It was the mama. When Charles and Diana got together, it was Margaret who was like, child, let him just marry whoever fuck he want to marry, right? Quit trying to force this Elizabeth, this Diana shit on him if you don't want to do it, right? The mama was like, no, I'm killing two birds with one stone. Because as you recall, Camilla Parker was fucking Charles, and then Bowles was fucking the sister. And when the sister told the family what was going on, the grandmother was like, oh, fuck that. I'm about to snip this shit in the bud real quick. You quit fucking a man. Him and Camilla gonna get married, and Charles is gonna marry Diana, and that's just what the fuck is gonna be. Excuse me. And so remember, so it really was the Queen Mother who really set up a lot of these two horrible situations where the characters are just really, really unhappy, right? And I'm not really faulting her because, it's tradition, it's the way things are, it's the way things were, but, the fault doesn't lie with Elizabeth because she made the final call, right? So at this point in the season, our prime minister is John Major, right? So John Major is the prime minister after Margaret Thatcher. She has left. And then we also get to meet Tony Blair, that person, most of their like character portrayals are kind of like really like on point. But the Tony Blair guy, I was like, that doesn't really look like Tony Blair, but whatever, okay? So John Major is, the new prime minister, and Charles like calls him in because Charles is trying to really do this thing where he's trying to scoot himself up to possibly have the public opinion swell, for the public to say, we want the queen to give to move Charles time to reign while he's still young or whatever like that. And John Major was like, I ain't getting from him. I'm not getting involved in none of y'all business, okay? He calls Major over, does this little shuck and jive. He goes to see the queen, doesn't say nothing, but makes it clear, I'm not getting involved in none of your business. Which is funny because it ends up being John Major who ends up negotiating, the settlement, another terms of the settlement between Charles and Diana as a personal favor to the Queen, because regardless of his politics or his policies in England, it seemed that his portrayal in the shows that he was a very calm, very steadfast, very steady person, right? So the Queen really liked him, whatever. So we go to Heather, so they go and do this thing. So Diana at the time is like really still very, very much unhappy. She starts off this kind of relationship with like this doctor who she meets when like her masseuse's husband gets like triple bypass. And you can already tell from the beginning, like, this isn't gonna work. Like, he's like, I'm socially awkward, I'm average. And she's just craving for someone to love her, someone to just really see her, someone just to be companionship. And it's just very heartbreaking to see someone who, by all accounts, by other people's standards, has everything, just be so alone and be so lonely. And it was just very, very heart-wrenching to do that. So then we always get, so for the history buffs, we get to, so as you recall, Queen Victoria was a great-great-grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. And one of her very famous kind of rises to fame, or kind of her biggest accomplishments, is that she had 34 surviving grandchildren, to which she all married throughout the European continent. So many of the monarchs today are all related to the British monarchy because they're all literally cousins. So we get the story of Nicholas II and the Romanovs, and really the story about how, they were assassinated, and the story of how the question came to his cousin at the time, who was the king, of whether or not to go and rescue them. He asked his wife, Queen Mary, whether or not they should do it. She says no, right? We take that story and then it's juxtaposed against Philip's relationship with Norton's wife. I forget what her name was. So at that point, that becomes kind of, Queen Elizabeth finds out about this whole situation. And so when the Yeltsin decides to come, he comes to visit. He wants Queen Elizabeth to come to Russia. She's like, I would come to Russia, but you really done, like, your whole family, like, weren't you part of the thing that, like, murdered my family? And they didn't have a proper burial because they're buried in the backyard like the house dog or some shit. So till you get that shit straight, I'm not fucking coming to Russia. He's like, talking to Russia low-key, like, hot garbage about her, which I don't know why. You couldn't tell me, there had to be somebody else who spoke Russian who would have been like, girl, he's fucking mad talking trash about you while you taking this picture. But for the sake of this arc and the story, we're just going to assume only one person spoke Russian who was standing there, who would have told the queen that he was talking hot garbage about her. So anyway, she's looking forward to this trip to Russia because, Philip being a direct descendant, because, Philip and Elizabeth are cousins, they're a set of cousins, not first, not second, but distant-ish cousins. And Philip is a direct descendant of the Romanovs, so they use Philip's DNA to be able to identify the bodies. And Elizabeth is happy, and he's just like very much like, when she's talking about it, he's like very curt with her. You could tell that he just doesn't think that she doesn't read, that he's not intelligent, because he's been fooled all along with like Norton's wife the entire time. So finally they get to Russia, and she's just like, I was hoping this would be something for us to connect with, something fun. And he's like, well, I've been having fun with my carriage racing and my little gang of friends and Philip's wife. And she was like, what? He was like, it's not that. She goes, it doesn't matter. Elizabeth is hurt because you're my soulmate. And if you're sharing things with me that you can share with some things with somebody else, and that's not with me, like that's hurtful, right? She's like, well, I want you to stop seeing her. She goes, no, what if I asked you not to see him? He was like, well, that'd be a mistake because I ain't do nothing, right? He was like, in fact, I want you to legitimize her and take her and be seen out in public with her so that folks ain't trying to make this more than what this is. And she was like, motherfucker, that's a big ask, okay? You asking me to put some like cloak of legitimacy over this bullshit you got going on? But he was 10 toes down with it. Like, I said what I said and I asked what I asked. Now, you could tell me no, and we can have that motherfucking problem, or we can fucking have the bitch over for brunch or do whatever, and we can just make this what it is, right? Which I was like, okay. I mean, it really makes you think like nothing really happened. He's like, I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to do nothing. And if you don't want this to be a problem, fucking meet the bitch. Have people wave at you and do like woo wah wah, right? So Philip and Norton's wife, so Elizabeth and Norton's wife, they meet at a castle. And they were talking about the Petiev house, which is where the Romanovs were married. And everyone, according to, with Norton's wife, has had the assumption that the Queen Mary did not have, was responsible for their deaths because there was this rivalry between the two princesses, between the two queens, and she didn't want the other queen there for for competition's sake. Which very much kind of on the surface looks like the whole situation with Elizabeth and Norton's wife, right? And Queen Elizabeth's like, I'm so glad you spent all your time reading, but that's not really what happened. The reason the Queen said no is because England was at war with Russia at the time, and having the Queen of Russia there would have not sent the wrong message and undercut England's message to Russia, right? And the Queen was devastated when she found out. She cried. And I was like, how fucking devastated could she be? The note said, do you want to save your cousins? Meaning that you were the thing of last resort. So I was like, okay, excuse me, I'll give you that, Elizabeth. You took the high road, whatever. And then Elizabeth invites her to go to church on Sunday to kind of put some comfort on this bullshit. And she's muddling through like Elizabeth does to this boy was like, oh my God, can you take this home to Buckingham Palace? Girl, Elizabeth almost fell the fuck out. She's like, this bitch don't live with us, which is what she's thinking, but she just kind of smiled. And I was like, ooh, girl. So then that episode ends with Elizabeth playing with the dogs and Philip doing his thing. And really the whole thing of like talking about Dostoevsky's wife and that she realizes that she can't really change people and you can't change your husband and you just accept how they are. I was like, okay, fine. Because at this point, nobody's leaving anyway. So we're like, good. But it was a good, but that whole arc or stories episode was good. Then the latter part of the season really kicks in with Diana and Martin Bashir. So I don't know if y'all remember from early last year, there was a whole thing because it came out that Martin Bashir used allegedly unscrupulous tactics to secure his interview with Princess Diana, right? So we see in these set of episodes the tactics Martin is using to get this interview with Princess Diana. And first is by kind of allegedly falsifying evidence, and then using her brother, the Earl of Spencer, Earl being his title, Spencer being his last name. I think his first name is John, but his title, the Earl of Spencer, to get to Diana because he's trying to say that all these people are, not being faithful to Diana or being loyal, that they're selling information because we're getting all these leaks in the press about what's going on with the royal family. So Martin Bashir puts forth this plan. At the same time, we see the Queen's Lady in Waiting. Her husband is the head of the Board of Governors for the BBC, and he's very much of that ilk of Queen Elizabeth, of steady, tried, true, the monarchy is here for everyone, that type of thing. And so we really get to see kind of, that whole situation. So needless to say, the interview goes off, as we've all seen in the history, and she plans at the night of Guy Fawkes Night, which is November 5th, which was, the night that these traitors tried to kill the monarchy and the parliament and blowing up. And really you see kind of, the tension, because it's like, was what she's doing treacherous? Or, it goes one person's terrorist and another person's freedom fighter, right? Because in Diana's mind, she's fighting for her freedom, and everybody else's mind, she's fighting for, she's being disloyal. So there comes to be the conversation that Diana says, look, we're going to air it. BBC's doing their whole him and a hawing because they don't really want to fucking blow up the spot with the Queen. But we come to, Diana has a conversation with the Queen that she goes, I'm going to tell her face to face that we're doing this, whatever. So Diana goes to goes to visit. Mama, thank you for meeting me. I've granted a conversation, granted this interview. And Elizabeth is perturbed. And they have this conversation that kind of really shows the chasm between the two women, right? She's like, Diana, look, bitch, we are busy. We are the definition of booked and busy in this bitch, okay? Ain't nobody thinking about you. Ain't nobody trying to do anything. Ain't nobody trying to ruin your life. Ain't nobody trying to, look, we barely in the same house for 2 nights a week together. We all are motherfucking busy. You busy. Maybe you ain't busy enough because ain't nobody thinking about you enough to be doing all these horrible things to you. In fact, every time people bring up your name to me, I defend you. I give you compliments. I do whatever. Diana's like, well, bitch, it don't feel like that because every time I go out in the streets, I'm hearing about how you talk about me, how I'm doing whatever. And she was like, girl, what are you doing? What else can we do for you, okay? How else can you be made happy here? Because all I want is for you to be happy. All I want is your children to be happy. Those are my grandkids. What the fuck else are we gonna do? Every time you fucking come up in this bitch, you talk about how unhappy you are or whatever. And Diana's like, because I'm still unhappy. You ain't listening to me. You ain't doing nothing. You ain't doing nothing for your trifling ass son. All this stuff. So it just ends in this chasm between the two characters because there's no movement, right? Now, do I think this conversation really happened in real life? I don't know. But, I mean, it was great for TV because you just saw two women who were like, this is what this is, right? And nobody was budging. When in retrospect, I think the problem is, and as we've seen with kind of reports about in real life with kind of Harry and Meghan Markle, is that there's the family and then there's the system, right? So whereas the family members aren't doing anything necessarily, the system is what was working against Diana. It may not be that the family members were actively doing anything, but it was the system that was working against her, and she was unable to separate the system from the people, just like Margaret was unable to separate the sister from the Queen, because it's easy to say, oh, I didn't do anything, oh, it wasn't us, right? But it's the system, whoever that is, that's doing it, and we really love you, and we really want you to be happy, but we're not seeing none of those facts. Diana's like, I'm not seeing none of this on the ground. I'm not seeing this in real life, right? So the thing comes out, and then we get to, probably in my opinion, one of the best episodes is Couple 31. It's the second to last episode, and it's the final decree and divorce for Diana. And they do the episode by having these couples come in, and right before their divorce, they have to talk to a clerk or something, about, their marriage was failed, what really didn't work. And at the same time, we're seeing, at this point, the Queen's like, I'm tired of this bullshit. She done put out this motherfucking book that embarrassed the dog fuck out of us. This ain't good for the kids. This ain't good for us. You know what? It's done. I done talked to the priest. I done talked to Jesus. Y'all can have your divorce. Go get fucking divorced, right? So, like all things, we see kind of like the trail and what has to happen with them getting divorced. And like she gets her lawyers, he gets her lawyers, she wants this amount of money, Charles wants some flexible. Diana's like, don't become so, the Queen, once she hears that things have become kind of acrimonious, is when she enlists John Major, the Prime Minister, is like, maybe you could be the umpire. And the greatest again, so many great things about this episode is he's at home telling his wife about how happy he is, about how, you know, he's gonna be working, and he always imagines himself being an umpire, and he has all these Quicken trophies. And his wife's like, so you gonna be gone? I mean, the kids ain't gonna see you? And it's like, damn, like she's trying to umpire somebody else's dissolution of marriage, and your own marriage is on rocky ground, right? Thought that was fantastic. So at the same time, Charles enlists a PR spin person for Camilla Parker Bowles because she's held up in her house and she's all sad and she can't go out. She's the side chick. Like, I don't know what, maybe this is when side chicks started like getting there, like whatever, but I was like, you're the side chick. Like, you're the woman on the side. Regardless of Charles' affections for her, you were having an affair with a married man. So there are consequences to doing that, right? Like, I don't know why Camilla thought that she was supposed to get off of this. Charles was like, oh, they've been so unfair, whatever. They'd have had their whole ass phone conversation intercepted and sold to the tabloids, embarrassing the family. I mean, all their little dirty business out there. Diana, I mean, just the whole thing. So then, I don't understand why then people got mad with Diana. It was like, well, there were 3 of us in this marriage because y'all motherfuckers heard and read the transcripts of their fucking talk or whatever. So I had very little sympathy for Camilla Parker Bowles in this show because I was just like, that's what side chicks get. Like, I mean, you can't help who you love, but you can help being a side chick, right? So anyway, all this is happening, and finally John Major works out this agreement for them to, you know, get the divorce because he's like, because the spin doctor's like, the more magnanimous you are with Diana in the divorce settlement, the quicker you could go and introduce Camilla Parker Bowles into the public and people can move on from Diana, right? So she gets moved on, they get to divorce, and as we're seeing like this judge who's going through case by case by case, and then at case 31, couple 31, the whole courtroom is present because it's the dissolution of the marriages of the Prince and Princess of Wales. And we just really saw, so then Charles comes over to Diana's and he's like, I don't know how I came over. The car just drove you over here. Okay. So then he comes in. She's like, well, I can make you something to eat or whatever. She's just kind of like, she's in that stage like, well, fuck it. We ain't married no more. I got to be nice to you anyway. So they decide to have an autopsy or an audit of their marriage. And it starts off, you know, Charles is like, you know, you're just very shy and you don't come out your shell. So this is why I invited people. Diana's like, the people you invited were your friends. They weren't really my friends. And then things become acrimonious because Charles refused. And Diana admits, she goes, I can be difficult. I was difficult. But, you know, Charles refused to take accountability for the fact that he got married and he was in love with someone else. And Diana's like, why did you marry me? He's like, I had no other choice. Right? Which, as I discussed previously, he had no other choice. The Queen Mother and the Queen have made it clear that Camilla Parker Bowles was not an option, right? So we have the daughter from the Earl of Spencer, you know, the Prince of Wales, perfect match, whatever. So both them, by the end of the conversation, everyone leaves unhappy, right? Because because the autopsy is, we failed, right? And Diana's crying, Charles is, you know, feels like, well, now I'm done and free with you. And it's just this very heartbreaking, heart-wrenching scene because, as the Queen was saying, she goes, the most beloved wedding of all time. And all this to end up with that. And it was like, well, that's what happens. You put more effort into the wedding than you do into the marriage, right? But no one could have thought things would have turned out that way, even though you should have just shipped Camilla Parker Bowles off to like South Africa or somewhere and told her not to be in contact with Charles ever again, right? But since they didn't really button up Camilla Parker Bowles good enough, this is why a lot of these things happen, right? So then we get to the end of the season and we're back with the Britannia and we're discussing, at this point, she's about to be decommissioned and we're in the handoff of Hong Kong back to China. And by this point, Tony Blair is now Prime Minister. And we just see the kind of emotional effects that, you know, all of Queen Elizabeth's reign has become and the emotional connection she has to this because she views as the decommissioning of the yacht to be a statement of decommissioning of her reign and how well she's done as queen, right? And so at the end, the yacht's gonna be decommissioned. She takes a final tour and that's how the series ends. So once again, The Crown, I salute you. Fantastic season. Guys, I hope you really enjoyed this. Go back and watch it. I would love to have some comments and discussion about this because this is one of my favorite shows. And I will see you guys later for White Lotus because I heard that was fantastic and off and poppin'. So I'm going to watch that and I'll get a review for you that. So please, if you're new to this channel, like, subscribe, share, discuss. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your day.